Have you ever thought about doing yourself a podcast? I know I do these in front of a camera and, we talk to different people, but a podcast is a whole other thing. And during these times of COVID, we talk about life and we talk about what's going on in the world. And who better to talk about life and ramble about life than the very own podcast expert, Robyn Brady. Robyn, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Eric. I appreciate it.
So I'm sure everyone knows who Robyn Brady is. If not, you've been living under a log, but let's ask. How have you been doing during this interesting time in our community, province, and the whole world for that matter?
Oh man, interesting is certainly a word. So I, in normal times, work in radio and work for CKXS in Wallaceburg. But as soon as the pandemic hit and things started closing down and we started losing advertisers and money at the station got crazy, crazy tight. And then the kids were out of school and everything just sort of exploded into this mass of insanity and anxiety, and I got laid off. So I have been at home with my kids 24 hours a day since March 27th. And it's been something of a roller coaster trying to manage the kids' mental health and my mental health and being on unemployment with for the first time since mat leave. And it's just yeah, it's been interesting. It's been quite a ride.
So it definitely has been a ride. I miss roller coasters. I know today, as we speak, Disney World has been opening, but I don't want to go there with a 2.5-foot pole. So
Right.
the segue to kind of all this, people have been huffing and puffing for almost, the past almost 4 months, let's go around there, about just what our problems are in the world. And you kind of put your own twist on that and started your own podcast show. Let's talk about how you created this whole concept.
Yeah, it's been an idea that being a radio person and in a radio family, my husband, Mike Renier, also works for one of the local radio stations. So it's sort of been joked about in our circle of friends for a while, like, oh, you guys should start your own podcast. And then as the pandemic wore on and I was, sitting at home and missing having some sort of regular routine that didn't involve the kids. And another friend of mine mentioned, he's like, you should really just do your own podcast. And I was like, there's really nothing stopping me from doing it. And it might be fun. I certainly can come up with things to talk about. So yeah, it was a matter of just getting that final push for someone to say, you really need to do this. You've got cool ideas. You've got interesting conversations that you can have. So after talking to my friend Mark one night, and then that night I went on Amazon and I bought myself some good headphones and I bought myself a microphone and downloaded some audio editing software for my laptop. And then the next day made my first podcast. So it sort of all came together really quickly once I got that final push.
Yeah, and if you haven't had a chance to listen to one of Robyn's ramblings, I'm going to put the link just in the bottom here. They are absolutely fantastic. She has spoken with Mark Reinhardt, the master of duct tape, as we all call him, some arts and culture. And, who else knows what else Robyn's coming up here. Something like COVID has affected us, physically, even mentally, just as we've all spoke. Our mental health is so important right now. But how important is discussing some of these topics in more of a fun way than, just straight facts? We're hearing facts left, right, and center, but we need to hear,
Right.
human perspective on it.
And I think that is the main thing, is getting the human perspective, that sort of one-on-one about it, that, so many of us are in our own little bubbles, so to speak, right now, that, we've been on our own for so long, and Facebook and Twitter and all of the social media is such an echo chamber that, like, all you're hearing is like such limited things, or there's a lot of negativity that flows around. There's a lot of fake news that floats around. So to me, finding something, and if I'm able to provide something that's a little more real and that people can relate to, is so important. That being able to, talking about, I did one of my podcasts with Elizabeth Downey talking about pandemic parenting. My goal wasn't to have a pandemic podcast, but that's what we're all living through. So that's what I have to talk about. And we got such great feedback from that show, just because there are so many parents who are dealing with different emotions from our kids and different struggles that we're dealing with having them so isolated. And I think being able to find someone who's going through the same thing as you and having them talk very plainly about it and trying not to sugarcoat anything. And, this has been really hard, and it's been hard on parents. It's been hard on kids. And to have someone say that, I think is sort of, it's sort of a release for other parents who are trying so hard to put on the brave face, like everything's great, everything's fine, we'll get through this together. But maybe we won't. Maybe we need to have a way to vent. And if finding someone that you can relate to who is struggling, then I think it makes it a little easier to deal with.
Yeah, I call it the new COVID lifestyle because we don't know. We are only, not even like I'd say a quarter way through. And as we get to the fall season, I've spoke with a couple of education experts. We don't know what's going to happen. So
Right.
what you've been doing is it's a new, fresh perspective than the straight facts. And it's great what you're doing. We always look forward to listening to them. So I always get the big questions from co-ops. Who knows if co-ops are going to come in,
Right.
you're a radio expert, but they want to put podcasts together. How difficult is something like this to put something, you call ramblings together? Is it facts or is it speaking from the heart? Do you have to write down your notes? Do you have to prepare for your content?
I mean, it starts with the idea, right? It's, coming up with something that you can talk about for more than 5 minutes. I mean, when we're doing news interviews for radio, those are like 5 to 7 minute interviews, but a podcast is a little longer. I usually make mine between 20 and 30 minutes. My last one stretched a little longer because we got into some pretty good conversation, but it starts with having a main idea that you can talk about at length, finding someone to talk to who can also talk at length, so you're not getting those like 2 or 3 word answers to questions. I do write out my questions just because that's how I work as a journalist, that I'm always, I have my prep. The old saying's always been, don't ask a question that you don't know the answer to, because that way you can sort of direct the conversation. But I also like asking questions that I don't know the answer to. One of my casts was with Deanna Bullard talking about the historical aspect of going through a pandemic, and how we're living history, we're making history, we're creating a new future. And I was sort of out to lunch on a lot of that, but I love the conversation that it creates. So having an idea, doing some prep ahead of time, and being able to talk without sort of stumbling around and trying to figure out where you're going next.
Yeah, that's one thing I always tell my co-op students, using the word for a little bit lets us show that we're thinking about what we want to say, but we don't quite know what we want to say yet. So
Right.
I do the same thing. I put my notes in front of us, but having those genuine conversations between two people, whether it's a municipal official, individual, and organization, it's kind of great to hear kind of, what everyone's perspective is coming. So what is Robyn's Rambling looking towards the future? What can we hear from Robyn's Rambling coming up?
Well, one of my friend Elizabeth is coming back for another chat in the coming weeks, talking about education. She is a former teacher herself, so we're going, and a future teacher. She's actually starting her own school, so we're going to talk about education and what we've learned from the pandemic, and what kids need and what they really don't need, and instead of trying to pave a way to a new way of doing school, because we don't necessarily need to do things the way we always have to make it the best for our kids, and sort of expanding on that. And especially with so much uncertainty about what September is going to look like, it's a good time to sort of explore some options and see what could be done. On a slightly more serious note, but also because they're my ramblings, we don't get overly serious too much. I'm going to be talking to James McNeil from Life Transitions, talking about death and dying and funerals in a time of a pandemic, because that has been completely turned on its head, and just sort of the way that things have changed and the grieving process has changed, and the way funeral homes and funeral directors work, because that's super complicated now. If you get a client who has passed away from the coronavirus, getting families together when we aren't supposed to be getting too many people together, it's crazy complicated now. So I'm really looking forward to that chat.
Sounds like some great content coming up. Again, I'm going to put the link right down here in the bottom here. If you're checking out Robyn's Ramblings for the first time or the third time, or you just, check doing some great stuff for our community, and we appreciate everything you're doing. Robyn, is there anything else you'd like to add as we close up?
I just want to thank you for the time. I always like, a little promotion here and there, but just for people to realize that whatever struggles they're going through, in a pandemic, that you are not alone in it, and that you, whether it's through my podcast or someone else's, because there are so many of us who are trying to have a voice in this time, that find someone who you can relate to and try to get some comfort from that.
Perfect. Well said. Well said. So again, one more time for the link at the bottom there. Check out Robyn's Ramblings. And I hope when this is all said and done that we can all meet up together and have a big Chatham-Kent block party to celebrate all the hardships we've endured.
Absolutely. It sounds great.
Thanks, Robyn.
Thanks so much, Eric.